So Nintendo's always been a weird company, especially when it comes to the concepts around their handhelds and their consoles. But nothing was stranger than when they introduced a certain system in the mid-2000s, and they also showed us a controller that looked like a TV remote. Well, I would say the Wii has gone on to really influence the way that a lot of these gaming companies are approaching gamers even today, and I wanted to talk about the core reason why, and that being the Wii Remote. So first we have to go back to the buildup of the Wii, which at the time was called the Revolution. That was the code name that it was introduced under, and back in E3 2005, the late Satoru Iwata held this thing above his head and talked about how it was gonna change and yes, revolutionize the way we play games, but they were pretty vague about it then, and all they said was that the controller was gonna be one of the big key aspects that changes everything up. And I mean, we were really speculating heavily online around this, and we didn't have to wait too long because months later, they gave us a bit of a demonstration with the controller at Tokyo Game Show, and then the following year, E3 2006 was the big blowout for the Wii. Even the name was not going over so well, especially in the games press and media and a lot of forums, because they went from the Revolution, which sounded awesome, to the Wii, which sounded really strange. And it makes sense now looking back on it with Wii seemingly representing multiple people playing the game together. And while features like the Virtual Console being introduced for the first time, as well as Wi-Fi and online play, which Nintendo first announced that and then said, oh, it's gonna be part of the new Smash Brothers game. Yeah, people were pretty excited about all of that, but the thing that really set the tone was indeed the Wii Remote. And a lot of it has to do with how approachable the Wii Remote is. Think about it this way. You sit down the Wii Remote in front of someone who's never played a game before, and you tell them to pick it up. Most likely they're gonna pick it up correctly because it looks just like a TV remote, which is something that they're already familiar with. They'll probably pick it up in this way, and they already have their finger on the back here by the B button. A button will be right under their thumb, and they won't even be realizing it, but they'll be in the correct position to start playing games. And that was really the genius around the Wii Remote. It targeted the mainstream audience, and we didn't see it at first. What we saw was this weird looking controller. We were trying to envision how we were gonna play games with it. I mean, really think about it. It's like, oh, it's a TV remote. How's that gonna be possible? But they made it work. And in fact, at that time, there were some really smart ways to play some of these games, and some that worked out really well, especially when it came to the pointer games where you were shooting a lot of stuff with Resident Evil 4, any of those rail shooters. But the biggest one, obviously, was Wii Sports, and I wanna take apart the Wii Remote and talk a bit about how all of that was even possible. So underneath the battery compartment here, we have a couple of tri-wing screws, and then we have two other ones back here. With those screws out, you just need to run a straight edge underneath the plastic here. And then the whole back half will lift right up. And I know from the outside, the Wii Remote looks very basic, but actually there was a lot going on inside of this controller. For example, they did have a speaker that they packed in, which I was trying to figure out when this first got introduced, how they were really going to use that, but there were some pretty cool use cases with it in different games, whether it was trying to be more immersive in certain titles or even just making a noise to let you know it's your turn in a multiplayer game. And the speakers used still to this day in something like the DualSense controller as an example there. So it's kind of going on to be a staple each generation to have a speaker in the controller after this. Looking around though with this, we do have our IR camera at the top. Obviously, that was a key aspect to the Wii Remote because it would tell the remote where your TV was. You had to set up a little sensor bar that had IR lights on it. Now, that didn't actually send any information back and forth with your Wii. It didn't communicate at all. It just used the cable to pull power to have those infrared lights work. And that was kind of it. The Wii Remote did all of the heavy lifting from there, which is one of the reasons that if you get a wireless sensor bar, you don't have to sync it up to your Wii. Again, there's no communication going on there. And in fact, if you don't have a sensor bar at all, there are a couple other ways you can go about having the Wii Remote understand that you need to pick something. You can point it outside a window if the sun's out to utilize that as sort of a heat signature, or you can even light candles and place them around your TV depending on the settings. Yeah, that actually works. Now, if we remove the board and we can flip it over, we do have the rumble motor here. This was a good spot for it, by the way, because if you were holding it like this, I mean, it's right next to your finger where you would get the most sensation from any kind of rumble. So they didn't even need like anything really large. This was a pretty small motor compared to things that were in the Xbox 360 controller and eventually the DualShock 3. You can see at the bottom we have a very, very large capacitor, which seems to be in line with our connector at the bottom. This was used for that nunchuck controller that added a joystick and a couple of extra buttons, as well as the classic controller, which I used a lot for the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo 64 games on that virtual console. Here we do have our Bluetooth chipset, so it can of course sync up to your Wii system. On this side, however, we have this little guy right here. This is our accelerometer. This is numbered ADXL330. And the way this worked with the Wii Remote, Nintendo did a really good job disguising this, by the way. It didn't actually know where it was in 3D space. Really, it had to rely on acceleration through X, Y, and Z axis, which was good because for the most part, accelerometers then only used, I believe, X and Y. They kind of added in an extra sensor for the Z axis, so it could detect acceleration, left, forward, up, down, basically in all directions. So that way, if you're, say, playing Wii Sports Bowling, if you are moving and accelerating up and down, it'll know that your bowling ball is technically moving in that throwing motion, and then you would let go of the button to finish the process. And this worked pretty well for a couple of months until people realized something that was deemed the Wiimote waggle, in that you didn't actually have to move much in order to accomplish a lot of this stuff, because remember, it's done through acceleration. So boxing, eventually people thought, oh, I can just win by moving my left and right hand really, really fast. And yeah, it would work. And this eventually led Nintendo to introduce the Wii MotionPlus, which brought in a gyroscope. So we have the accelerometer, the gyroscope, and the IR pointer all working together. And that gave them a more true one-to-one motion, because the gyroscope can track in 3D space and the accelerometer can track acceleration, and obviously the IR pointer will tell you where you're pointing on the screen. All of this brought together meant you could do things like Skyward Sword, a much better tracking sword swing than what we had in Twilight Princess, which was once again us just moving left and right really fast. You know, I kind of see that Wii MotionPlus as the expansion pack of that generation. I know we think of little upgrades for systems like that expansion pack to aid the system in terms of just raw power. That just added more RAM to the system and had it able to hit higher resolutions, better frame rates, and in some cases, play games that weren't possible before that. The Wii MotionPlus made the motion tracking better on the Wii Remote, which was a core functionality of the Wii itself, and yes, enabled it to play certain games it wasn't before. And finally, we have this little chip right here. This was able to store information from your Wii in some cases. The thing with this is it was a very small amount of storage. It was mostly used to transfer Miis between consoles. And, I mean, it was a cool idea to have a really tiny memory card built into your Wii Remote, so you could take some of your Miis to your friend's house, sync up your controller, and they would appear. It was, I think, 128 kilobits. So if you turn that over to bytes, I think they had 4 kilobytes that was available to different games and 6 that was reserved for the Miis. Essentially, it wasn't a lot of space. I think Smash Brothers, you were able to save user configurations. I mean, this was less space than I think a single block in a PS1 memory card. So if you've ever wondered why a lot of games didn't use that functionality, the onboard storage for your Wii Remotes, because there really wasn't much that was usable. Now, I had mentioned the Wii Remote had a pretty serious influence on gaming overall, and I really do think that's something that's still felt to this day. At the time, Wii Mania was ridiculous. This system was always sold out. We'd have people call these different stores and we would answer without them saying anything, we don't have any Wiis. Like, that was it. And that would handle 70% of the calls. Really, the thing that was so impressive about the Wii wasn't anything when it came to the specifications. It was kind of a slightly beefed up GameCube, kinda, but it had more so to do with the ability to bring in people who have never played games to come in and play games. The remote was the big reason why that was even possible, because it was so familiar without anyone ever having to pick it up. Which meant you had your grandparents playing the Wii, specifically Wii Sports, but still, it brought them into that Nintendo ecosystem. And from there, maybe they checked out other games, maybe they just had a blast with Wii Sports, and that was good enough for them. But for Nintendo, who was selling the system at a pretty nice little profit there for basically the entire time, they were pretty happy with it, and it got people familiar with the Nintendo brand who, again, had never played games before. And we could see this quickly bleed over to the other brands with Sony and Microsoft certainly scrambling a bit to figure out their own solution for motion controls. While PlayStation did launch the PS3 with the 6-axis that had motion built in, it wasn't a focus for them. I mean, we had like Lair, I think, is a game that I played with the motion controls. Basically, they weren't necessarily all in on it like Nintendo was. They did eventually come up with their own Move controllers that, while it was similar to what we had with the Wii Remote, it certainly wasn't as straightforward. There was a lot of setup that went into it. And as we've gone along, we've actually had comments get out there from both Sony and Microsoft around the situation with the Wii. As an example, with Microsoft, we had an entire documentary where they went through the history of Xbox, and yeah, even that pivotal moment in 2006 when Nintendo launched the Wii, and how caught off guard they were by it. Apparently, this according to Phil Spencer, Bill Gates wasn't exactly thrilled that they missed the boat on motion gaming. I remember Bill putting a lot of pressure on the Xbox leadership team. How did we miss motion gaming? What can we do to catch up? And we know what happened from there. The Kinect was born, and people look back on the Kinect as being a failure. They sold 35 million units. And then from Sony's perspective, this from Jack Tretton, who said, Nintendo came out of left field with a device that wasn't based on technology. It was based on a simple entertainment experience of being able to play a game without being a button masher on a controller. Clearly they expanded the audience and they took gaming to mainstream entertainment. And that's something Nintendo did so well with the Wii and the Wii Remote, was reach the mainstream audience. And that's something that I think we're seeing a bit of a struggle right now, especially with cloud gaming and stuff, where you're eliminating the console, but you're not eliminating the controller. Something that if you put down a controller like a PlayStation 5, even a Switch Pro controller, Joy-Cons, Xbox controller, in front of someone who's never played a game before, looks like an alien artifact. They pick it up, they don't really know where all their fingers, their thumbs go. This was much more straightforward, and unfortunately, I think until we figure out the barrier of entry that is the controller, it's gonna be tough to push that out to the mainstream. But it was certainly an interesting time period to watch unfold in gaming, with the Wii becoming the most successful console of that generation, selling over 100 million units. And it didn't do it on high-end specification. This was all about them working to bring gaming to the masses, to people who have never tried a game before, but felt like they were right at home immediately with Nintendo's newest system and the Wii. But let me know what you guys think about all this down below, and what your initial thoughts are when you first saw the Wii Remote to what you thought of it towards the end of that generation. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.